Hello everyone, welcome back to our last session of today conference, mini conference by Indonesian Students Associations in Queensland. And we have a very special speaker today. Oh, first I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gunaro Setiawan, also known as Igun, and I work at the Griffith Asia Institute at the moment. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker for today. A very special person, very young, he has outstanding achievements here. Mohamad Lutfi Ramadhan, currently a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland, and his specialty is in the fire research, fire safety and engineering. So Lutfi hold Masters of Mechanical Engineering and also Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering from University of Indonesia, both with cum laude. And he are now working at the working part time at the fire consultant as a fire consultant at the Omni company called Omni. And he's also a researcher and an academic tutor. And he used to work as a casual lecturer and researcher at the University of Indonesia as well. So Lutfi has done 9 publications. 3 of amongst are proceedings from the conference, including in the Journal of Fire Safety, and then Earth and Environmental Science, and at the Procedure Engineering. And he also has received many awards and distinctions, such as the awardee of 2018 UQ Global Change Scholars Program, and then UQ Research Training Program for PhD, and Sheldon Thiessen Student Award for 12th International Symposium on Fire Safety Science. So please welcome Mohamad Lutfi Ramadhan. Hello,
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Igun.
No, we're very happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to hear from you.
Sure. All right. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. All right. Before I start the presentation, I would like to thank to the committee for preparing this mini conference, which I found that it is very interesting. And today, I would like to present some part of my research. But before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Mohamad Lutfi Ramadhan, and currently I'm a PhD student in the University of Queensland, Australia. And for my PhD, I'm working within the Fire Safety Engineering Research Group in the School of Civil Engineering. And so my topic for my PhD is working on the role of moisture content on the flammability of Australian vegetation. So it is understood as the wide and the big topic, but for this presentation, I will just talk about small part of it. So yeah, before we move on to the main topic, I would like to introduce to you about the fire safety engineering, because I believe most of you don't really know what actually fire safety engineering is. And I also believe that most of you don't really know that we exist. So fire safety engineering is one of the multidisciplinary engineering discipline, and it consists of most of the engineering programs, such as mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, civil and environmental engineering, as well as electrical engineering. And each of engineering disciplines provides a different aspect for fire safety engineering. For example, like mechanical engineering, they usually provide the thermodynamics or heat and mass transfer during the combustion process. And in the application, they usually working on how the fuel could ignite or the active fire protection system on the building. And for the chemical engineering, they usually working on the reaction for the combustion and the gas emission from the flame, as well as the toxicity of the gas itself. And in other hand, for the civil engineering or structural engineering, they usually focus on how structures behave in the fire. So yeah, fire safety engineering is a very big discipline for now. And there are many other subjects that are also related to the fire safety engineering in order to improve and create the safer built environment. And yes, we agree that fire safety engineering is not a mature engineering discipline, but during the last few decades, enormous progress has been made for this discipline. We are still trying to build a solid research base and try to define a well-known terminology. There are a lot of research based in fire safety engineering, but mostly they are working in their own terminology or their own prescriptive in fire safety. So until now, we are still trying to gather all of the information that we have to build well-defined and well terminology. And not all of the university providing the educational program for fire safety engineering. Most of the university who provides this degree are from the US or the European, but currently in Asia, we are still growing mostly in China or Japan and some of in Indonesia, such as in the University Negeri Jakarta or in the University of Indonesia in mechanical engineering. And here is what we covered in research for fire safety engineering. There are fire physics, fire chemistry, structural response and design, human behavior, risk assessment, performance design, separation, detection, and smoke management, and many other topics. And if you have looked closely in here, that my topic is actually only small part of it, which is the wildland fires. But actually, to fully understand what the wildland fire is, I need to understand how the fire could ignite and how the ignition occurs on the flaming combustion and how much energy released by the combustion by measuring the heat release rate. And after that, after flame growth and spread, I also need to understand the fire physics or fire phenomena behind that. So in short, to understand the wildland fires, I also need to understand most of the topic in here, which is very interesting for me. So yeah, now let's move on to the main topics. So in Australia, we know wildland fires as bushfire. So bushfire is essentially a forest fire, or we can say wildland fire, it's the same, which is the fire that burns in grass, bushlands, or woodlands, and it can threaten life, property, and environment. In Australia, hundreds of bushfire events happened since 1851, when the European came to Australia and changed the fire management. Since then, over 800 casualty and 1.6 billion loss have accounted in Australia. There were three worst bushfire events occurred in Australia. The first one was Black Tuesday bushfire, which happened in Tasmania on 7th February 1967, and it burns approximately 264,000 hectares area with approximately 62 casualties. And the next one was Ash Wednesday bushfire, which happened in South Australia and Victoria on 16 February 83 with 75 casualties. And the last one was Black Saturday bushfire in Victoria, 7 February 2009 with 173 casualties. If we have a look closely in here, that most of the bushfire events happened on February, which is the summer in Australia. So in summer, Australia has a relatively high environment temperature with the low relative humidity and low moisture content of the fuel. So basically, all of the fuel in Australia is ready to be burned at summer. But the real question is why wildfires are getting more severe. Is it only because of the climate condition, or it is also because of the fire management or fire risk assessment? To answer this question, we need to understand what wildland fire is and what things that influence the wildland fires. There are vegetation fuel, fire behavior, flammability, and fire danger model. Now we start to explain each of the topics. Australia has a high diversity of vegetation, and there is a classification based on the fuel type of vegetation in Australia. There are forest fuel, grassland fuels, and so shrubland fuels. With 70 to 75% of Australia's land is covered by grassland fields. But in here, I would like to focus more on forest field, because most of the wildland fires are started from the forest field before it spread to another type of vegetation. So the forest field in Australia is consisted of acacia, different species of the vegetation. There are acacia, calistris, casuarina, eucalyptus, mangrove, melaleuca, and rainforest. And 80% of Australia's forest fuel is dominated by the eucalyptus tree or eucalyptus species. And most of the eucalyptus species is dominating the bushfire in Australia. And to understand why in Australia, or how the fire could occur in Australia, we need to understand the real problem, which is there is one part of vegetation that is very critical in contribution to the fire, which is the foliage or leaves. Why? Because most of the wildland fires are generally spread faster through the foliage or leaves. And foliage and leaves has the unique, it has a high surface to volume ratio, which makes the foliage and leaves extremely sensitive to the environment. And until now, foliage or leaves are commonly used to assess the wildland fire risk. And next, we move on to wildland fire behavior. So there are two different fire behavior that could occur in wildland fire. The first one is the surface fire. Surface fire is the fire that occurs in the surface of the land, and it's usually produce a flame front that consumes fuel litter, grassland fuels, and also understory vegetation. And if the heat from the surface fire is enough to heat up and combust the fuel above that, the crown fire will occur. And if the crown fire is already happened, it usually followed by active spreading from one tree to the other trees. So when the crown fires is occurred, it is very hard to be controlled. And here is how the mechanism of the fire spread. So in the fire spread, there are three different zones. The first one is the preheating zone, where the virgin fuel is preheated by the heat from the nature. And in here, the fuel dehydration process takes place and the moisture released to or evaporated. And if the temperature from the heat, for the external heat still heat up the sample or the fuel, the pyrolysis will be occurred and produce a volatile matter. In this condition, the vegetation fuel is ready to burn. And if the ignition takes place, the flaming combustion will occur and diffusion flames will be formed. In here, exothermic reaction means high temperature will be formed or dominant with the very high buoyant flow from the flame, and the flaming front in here will be used to preheat the unburned fuel next to it. After the flaming combustion extinguished, the smoldering combustion will be occurred in the porous fuel or in the fuel left over from the flaming combustion. In here, wind speed dominates the velocity field, and compared to the flaming combustion, smoldering combustion only produces a low energy level, but it can sustain for days or weeks. So smoldering combustion is one of the problems that we had in Indonesia. For example, in the peatland fire. And yeah, it is commonly found in Indonesia. So after we talk about fire spread mechanism, there is one part that is very important to affect to the fire spread, which is the fuel flammability. What is actually fuel flammability? The terminology of flammability is the capability of a fuel to ignite and sustain the fire. This is how previous researchers classify the flammability. There are 4 different criteria to define flammability. The first one is ignitability, which is the ability of a material to ignite and form the flaming combustion. This criteria is usually represented by the time to ignition or the temperature to ignite. And the second one is the combustibility, which is the rapidity of the combustion after ignition, which usually represent by the amount of energy release rate during the combustion process. And the third one is the consumability, which is the amount of fuel that could be consumed by the fire, which is usually represented by the total mass loss during the combustion process. And the last one is sustainability, which is the ability of fire to maintain itself once it ignited, which is represented by the total heat released during the combustion. The fuel flammability is very important to assess the fire danger. So, Lutfi et al. Has assessed the fire danger into two different dangers. The first one is the ignition danger, and the second one is the propagation danger. So we usually divide the ignition process to the fire spread because most of the wildland fire danger are most of the wildland fire is started from the ignition of the fuel. After the ignition occurs, another ignition process will be occurred, which makes the fire spread. So we can say that the flame spread or flame propagation is actually a series of ignition. The most interesting part in here is that the fuel moisture content is one of the factors that could influence both dangers, ignition dangers and propagation dangers. But until now, we still don't really know what is the difference of the moisture content between the dead and live leaves. And until now, usually only dead leaves that used to estimate the total wildland fire behavior on the fire risk model. And they usually assume that the live leaves is actually the dead leaves with the higher moisture content. And now I'll try to explain the importance of moisture content on the fuel, vegetation fuel. So it can be explained by the heat transfer phenomena. So moisture will influence to two different phases. The first one is on the solid phase or on the solid fuel. Moisture will change the fuel properties, or I can say in here is the thermal inertia, which is one of the properties that is very critical for the heat transfer mechanism during the preheating process. The moisture content will also add an additional term in the energy balance of the fuel by its latent heat of vaporization of water. By adding latent heat of evaporation of water, it increases the energy required to vaporize the water and reach the ignition. And if the heat provided to the solid phase is enough to produce a volatile matter or gas phase, the role of moisture will change to the gas phase. The moisture vapor will act as a heat sink and absorb the energy that could be used for the ignition. Because of that, it will reduce the temperature of the flame. The moisture vapor will also displace oxygen from the reaction zone, which in that case, if the flaming combustion occurs, the less combustion efficiency will resulting, and it will also resulting in the lower flame height. And if the fuel itself has a really high moisture content and the moisture vapors with the high rate, the flaming will not sustain, and probably it only will occur a smoldering combustion. So this is the role of moisture on the fuel itself, but we still don't really understand the difference of the moisture on the dead and live leaves. So the objective of this study, of this part of study, is to understand the differences in the fire behavior between dead and live leaves. To reach this objective, we did some of some experiments. Here is the experimental apparatus that we used. So the first one is the environmental chamber to condition the sample and get the different moisture content for each sample. And after that, we also use the moisture analyzer to measure the moisture content of the leaves right before the test. And the third one is the simultaneous thermal analyzer to perform the thermographimetric analysis to understand the characterization process of the sample or the fuel. And the main apparatus is the mass loss calorimeter. So mass loss calorimeter is essentially a device to measure the mass loss of the sample during the flaming combustion. So if you have a look in here, there is a conical heater that provides heat to the sample or to the fuel in here. When the heat reach to the fuel and the fuel produce a moisture and also produce a flammable gases, and the flammable zone in here will be created, and the ignition will take place. And from that, we will measure the mass loss during the fire. And in here, we try to put different external heat to the sample from 25, 35, 50 kilowatt per square meter energy. And in here, I'll try to show you a video how the device is working. So yeah, so essentially, we try to put the sample, and the conical heater will heat up the sample. As you can see in here, there is, I don't know, maybe it's not really visible, but actually it is a mixture between the moisture and also the flammable gases or volatile matter from the fuel. And when the combustible reaction happens, the ignition will occur. Here. All right. So there are some criteria that we measured in this device. For example, the time to ignition, which represent the delay in ignition for the sample, for example. And also we also measure the mass loss of the fuel during the flaming combustion. And here is the sample that we used in this. We are using the eucalyptus salicnatris that we can find commonly in Australia. And there are two different conditions of the sample. The first one is the live leaves, which is collected directly from the trees. And it is still green in the color. And inside of the live leaves, there is still bound water, which is the water inside the cell that cannot be extracted easily. And the second one is the dead leaves, which is collected from the fuel layer from the ground. And compared to the live leaves, the color of the dead leaves is already brownish. And the dead leaves has only free water, which is the water that can be extracted easily because it has no bond on the cell. After we collect the sample, we condition and prepare the sample first. So there are three different conditioning processes. The first one is fresh sample, which explains that the sample is directly tested after it collected. And the second one is often dried sample, which means that the sample is dried on the oven dryer to get the very dry moisture of the sample. And the last conditioning process is using the environmental chamber with the different relative humidity on the chamber, so we can get wide range of moisture content. So as a result, for the conditioning process, we got two different ranges for the leaves. For the live leaves, we received 4 to 120% of moisture. And for the dead leaves, we got 3 to 14% of the moisture. So all of these moisture changes will be tested on the mass loss calorimeter. And here is the characterization of the sample using the thermographimetric analysis. Actually, it's pretty hard to explain it, but I'll try to explain it as simple as possible. So basically, thermographic analysis is to understand the decomposition process of the sample with the increase of the temperature. So I'll try to explain that in the x-axis, in the temperature increase, and the y-axis in the right hand side is the weight or weight loss during the increase of the temperature. And in the left hand side is the derivative of the weight which is the weight loss rate from the thermographic analysis. So in here we are using the nitrogen, so there will be no oxidation process of the fuel. And in here, I can explain that there are 4 different decomposition process for the eucalyptus salicina leaves. The first, it can be represented by different peak on the graph in here. So the first peak means that it is the moisture released from the sample, which occurred on the 100 degrees Celsius. And the second one is the decomposition of the hemicellulose, which is the substances which occur as the constituents of the cell walls with the very simple structures than other cells. And the third one is the decomposition of the cellulose. And the last one is the more complex structure of the leaves, which is lignin. And next, we are also tested, and we also did the thermographic analysis for the eucalyptus salicina leaves using air, which makes the sample will also oxidated, or there is a combustion process in it. Pretty much similar. This one is the moisture release, and here the shoulder is the hemicellulose decomposition, and this one is cellulose, lignin, and this biggest peak is the oxidation of cellulose and lignin. So if we compare between dead leaves and live leaves, there is slightly difference between those graphs, which even though it looks similar. If we compare between dead leaves and live leaves have a slightly higher on most of the decomposition process, which means that the dead leaves probably has a higher combustible matter compared to the live leaves. And it also can be explained by the weight graph here. So the gradient of the weight loss of the dead leaves is higher compared to the live leaves, which means that the amount of mass loss during the decomposition process is higher compared to the live leaves. Okay, so that's the characterization, the sample characterization. And now we move on to the results and discussion. Well, actually, I won't explain much about the results, but I'll try to explain it in the simple explanation. So the first one is the effect of moisture content on the ignition process. So in here, we try to differentiate the live leaves and dead leaves. And in the x-axis is the moisture content, and in the y-axis is the ignition delay time, or the time to ignition, or the time for the sample to reach the ignition process. So if we have a look in here, that the increase of the moisture content will delay the ignition time, which means that the moisture will delay the ignition time by its evaporation process, and it happened to both leaves condition. And also, I tried to vary the heat flux or external heat provided to the sample. There are 25, 35, 50 kilowatt per square meter. And as we can see in here, the higher heat flux will producing the faster ignition, which means the energy or high heat will produce a significant or rapid heating process. And if we have a look, correlation between the moisture content and the ignition delay time, we can get the linear regression or linear correlation on both dead and live leaves. And from this linear correlation, we can get the equation, linear equation from the linear regression model. So yeah, here is for the live leaves and this one for the dead leaves on the different condition of heat flux. And in here, we'll try to explain what is the difference of the moisture between live leaves and dead leaves. And we did the inverse predicting model by using the regression model or equation from the live leaves to observe or estimate the time to ignition of the dead leaves. And also we are using the model that we had from the dead leaves to estimate or observe the ignition time of the live leaves. And here is the result. So in here, yeah, we also separate to live leaves and dead leaves. And on the left-hand side, as you can see in here, that the x-axis is the observed ignition delay time from the experiment. And y-axis is the estimated ignition delay time from the model that we retrieved from the dead leaves model. And the solid line in here is the linearity between the observed ignition time and the estimated ignition time. If we have a look in here, when we are using the dead leaves model to estimate the live leaves ignition time, it tends to be overestimating the ignition process. Different phenomena happen when we are using the model from live leaves to estimate or observe the ignition time of the dead leaves. It looks okay, but actually most of the data are underestimate the observed ignition time from the experiment. So in here, from this result, we can conclude a little bit that actually it is different. So moisture behaves differently between live leaves and dead leaves. And we couldn't use only dead leaves to measure a whole wildland fire risk. And it is very interesting. And now, next result is the effect of moisture content on the burning rate. So burning rate is actually the amount of energy released during the combustion process. And in here, the energy, okay, so the x-axis is again the moisture content and y-axis is the energy. So by increasing the moisture content of the sample or of the fuel, the energy released during the combustion will also reduce. This is because the water behaves as the heat sink that absorbs the energy that is required for the combustion. That is why the energy released during the combustion process is lower for the higher moisture content sample. And if we compare between the live leaves and dead leaves, we couldn't compare head to head to whole moisture content because we know that the dead leaves only have a limited range of moisture content, approximately from 0 to 12.5. So we can only compare this moisture content with this area of the graph. So if we have a look in this area, that we can say the energy released by the dead leaves is relatively higher compared to the live leaves in the same condition, in the same moisture content condition. That could be explained because maybe even the fuel is already dried in the live leaves. There is still remain bone water inside of the cell, so that the combustion will decomposing the cell structure first. Then the water inside of the cell will be released and work again as the heat sink and reduce the energy released during the flaming combustion. And this could be also explained by the traction measurement of the burning rate. And here we try to measure the energy release rate during the combustion process. So in here, the x-axis is time and the y-axis is the energy release rate. And we compare the fresh condition of the sample with the oven-dried condition of the sample, which means that these samples have the highest moisture content on the test. But this one, since it has been dried by using the oven, it produced the smallest or the lowest moisture content of the sample. So let's talk about the fresh condition first. So it is so in here, time starts from 0, which means that the heat is provided to the surface of the sample. And the energy released from the fuel will be increased until the ignition occurs, represented by the flaming combustion. When the ignition occurs, the energy released will reach the peak value. And if we compare between the dead leaves and live leaves, the energy released by the dead leaves is higher than the live leaves, of course, because of the moisture content of the live leaves is much higher than the dead leaves. But the duration of the flaming combustion for the dead leaves is much shorter than the live leaves, which means that the moisture will probably behave as a heat sink and absorb the energy. But actually, the fuel that is ready to be burned in the live leaves is still more than the dead leaves. That what makes the duration of the flaming combustion for the live leaves is longer than the dead leaves. Indifferent when we try to test the oven-dried condition, which means that it is very similar condition of the leaves for the dead and live leaves. Again, the peak energy value for the dead leaves is higher compared to the live leaves, but it is in the same condition. It is also could be explained similarly by the previous explanation that that again in the live leaves there is still bone water inside of the live leaves, even it is already dried by the oven, because it is very hard to decompose the cell structures of the leaves, so that the water released from the cell structure will reduce the energy released from the combustion process. So from that we can jump to the conclusion that actually the moisture and leaves condition have a direct influence to the flammability and the fire behavior. And moisture content will also behave as a heat sink in the fuel bed and during the flaming combustion process. And the third one is the moisture will also delay the mixing process of the flammable mixture in the reaction zone. And here is the big conclusion from this study is to justify the need to treat the live and dead leaves separately and not to assume that the live leaves are dead leaves with the higher moisture content. And here, with this project and with this study, we are trying to reassess the wildland fire risk model that currently being used in Australia to also use the live leaves in the model. And it is currently still it is still on progress. And I think that's all, everything that I can explain and present here. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mas Lutfi. Very interesting and different presentation. The time now until the next session, and I would like to allow the audience to give questions. And first now from Mas Herdian Maulana from UNJ. So, Mas Lutfi, do you mind to explain further about the role of human behavior study in fire engineering? Okay, there's some bit of convergence there.
Yep.
What by egress design you mentioned in the slide? Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Actually, it is very interesting for the fire, and human behavior is very critical during the fire process. So, human behavior is usually used when the fire occurs in the building or in wildland fire, wildland urban interface. And actually, I know Materian is from psychology, and it is very critical that to understand how human behave in the fire condition, because it is very critical when the egress or evacuation happened during the fire event in the building or in the wildland. It is very critical that the people or human still needs to remain calm, not stressed in the condition, because that kind of behavior will be affecting the evacuation process, the occupant evacuation process and egress. So yeah, that's very critical. The human behavior is very critical during the evacuation process or egress. That's my answer.
All right, moving on to the next question. Mas Gunawan Tanuwijaya asked about whether there are research in UQ related to disability escape routes in high-rise buildings.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, this is also very interesting in building fires. And no, currently, no. There is no study related to disability on the evacuation process during the fire or emergency situation. But Australia has their own codes, building codes, that that regulate that kind of system on the building. So most of the building in Australia has been provided by uh, um, the system or protection system or evacuation system for the disability. So yeah, so in Australia we already developed that kind of codes or standard on the building. But yeah, but the research in the university is not focusing on that, sadly.
Thanks, Mas Lutfi. Moving on. From Mas Mega from Jakarta here, Mega Nusa Lutfianto. So in places with high moisture in the air, like tropical areas such as NT or Indonesia, Northern Territory, will the nature of leaf flammability be any different?
Yep, it is totally different. But yeah, if you can see like from the previous slide that I presented the worst bushfire event, mostly worst bushfire event happened in the southern part of Australia, right? So in the southern part of Australia is unique. Before summer, it was a spring, which that the leaves or vegetation is blooming. At that time, massive of fuel, vegetation fuel, occurred on that part of Australia, and then we move on to the summer, which is very different condition than spring. In southern Australia, yeah, during the summer it has very high temperature and low relative humidity. So that's why the worst bushfire occurred mostly in the southern part of Australia. But in the tropical areas, such as in Northern Territory or Indonesia, it totally will be different. And most of the in the Northern Territory is not a forest fire. Mostly it's a bush fires, or sorry, shrubland fires or grassland fires. And also in Indonesia, actually, most of the the most problem for Indonesia is not a forest fire, but it is the pit fire. So it's totally different type of wildland fires.
Thank you, Mas Lutfi. A bit of comment there from Fahri Ali Imran. He just commenting that the test method usually dry the samples at the control rate, and while in the in the field, it's not controlled. So,
Yep.
think about. And from Diva Almaputri, about your view regarding the similarities or differences of the flammability behavior in Indonesia and Australia?
Yeah. So actually, the flammability is different for every type of vegetation species. So there is no constant or consistent to define the flammability of the vegetation. And we usually use the flammability classification that I've been explained it before to rank or classify the flammability classification or rankings for each type of vegetation so that it can be used, so that data could be used to plan the landscape of the land. So if we found one type of vegetation, it has a very high flammability rank compared to the other vegetation, we have to avoid to grow that plant in the landscape, which was very sensitive to the bushfire or wildland fire. So yeah, and if we compare between Indonesia and Australian vegetation, it's totally different. And it's in Australia, most of the vegetation are tropical, and mostly in Indonesia there is a tropical rainforest with a really high moisture content. And so yeah, hopefully Indonesia is not as high, the flammability is not as high as in Australia.
Thanks very much, Mas Lutfi. I'm afraid I have to stop here because we have to move on to the next session. Although we have
thank you very much, Mr. Igun,
from Mas Hakim and from Mas Asad. Hopefully, probably you can contact the Mas Lutfi directly. And thank you very much, Mas Lutfi. Again, very interesting, very deep, very insightful. Thank you very much. Hope we can put this into session.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to the last session here, we have Mbak Nadya Wanda Kirana from UNJ, Universitas Negeri Jakarta. Hello, Mbak Nadya, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Pak Gunaro.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you here. Good to have you here. Just gonna read a bit of about Nadya. So Mbak Nadya just recently completed her study at the Bachelor of Psychology at the Universitas Negeri Jakarta, and she worked at the Ashoka as a project implementation intern, and she's responsible to execute Ashoka Fellow election process in Indonesia and Sea Diamond, and at the Southeast Asia, and then collaborating with network of nominators to find the right fit to selection process of Ashoka Fellow, and then engagement strategy for Ashoka Fellow candidates. And she also worked at the ibunda.id as a peer counselor. So very interesting. She provided some digital counseling through online platform and ibunda.id website. And she has done event and partnership intern at the where she is responsible to build partnerships with public figures and influencers and organizations. And she also responsible in the process of developing the marketing plans and strategies. And interestingly, she also worked at the Calendar Islamic Psychiatric Hospital. So that's something to tell about to the audience later, if you have time. So as a clinical psychology intern, so in the psychiatric hospital, very interesting. And she also worked at the Asian Power Games in 2018 as a member of legal, HR, and volunteer division. So, all right, look forward to hear about Mbak Nadya presentations, and yeah, I'll hand it to Mbak Nadya. Thank you.
Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Nadya, a psychology first graduate with immense interest in animal welfare, well-being, and human-animal bond. So today, I'm very pleased to talk about pet ownership and its effect on personality and psychological well-being. And I'll start with a quote that says, "Saving one animal definitely won't change the world, but it will change the world for that animal." Maybe some of us here own a pet at home, be it a pet you adopt from an animal shelter or a pet you buy from a pet shop or a breeder. Whatever it is, thank you for saving an animal. However, I strongly recommend anyone today to adopt, don't shop. Do not buy any kind of animals from a pet shop or a breeder. Instead, you can save the strays from the street or adopt from an animal shelter. It will be much helpful, not only to that animal, but also to the society. So, what does a pet truly means? Well, according to Merriam-Webster, a pet is a domesticated animal whose primary functions is pleasure and companionship. Many of us as pet owners believe that our furry family can provide mental and physical benefits to us. Indication of the potential benefit that pets convey to the experience of well-being comes from evidence detailing the benefits of pet ownership in terms of stress reduction, improved quality of life, pet owners tend to be more extroverted, and pet owner companionship impacts positively on the owner's psychological well-being in terms of decreased depression, anxiety, loneliness, and also increased our self-esteem and self-worth. However, on the other hand, many previous studies have shown us that pet ownership negatively impacts our mental and physical health. Pet owners found tended to be more depressed than non-pet owners. They also suffer more from psychological and physical problems, such as chronic tiredness, insomnia, anxiety, allergies, as well as spread of diseases, such as fleas from dogs and cats, and the most popular myth around us that cat can transmit us the toxoplasmosis that can affect female fertility, which is not good. And pet owners tended to be as lonely as before they got their companion animal. So it has nothing to do with cats or any kind of pet decreasing our loneliness. The fact is, however, that empirical studies of the effects of pets on human health and well-being have produced a mishmash of conflicting results. In short, despite the growing body of research on the bonds between people and pets, the existence of a pet effect on human health and well-being remains a hypothesis in need of confirmation rather than an established fact. And the potential benefits that owning a pet might confer specifically to well-being has received little attention in Indonesia. For that reason, a research was conducted early this year. Participants in the study were 1843 pet owners, aged 11 to 66 years, spread throughout Indonesia. This research uses a quantitative approach by distributing questionnaires, which are then analyzed by multiple regression analysis. The psychological well-being of pet owners is measured using the Reeve scales of psychological well-being by Carol Reeve, and the personality is measured using the Big Five inventory tent by Ramstead and John. Now we move on to the characteristics of the participants. The result shows that most of them are female employees and they are aged 19 to 40 years, or we can say that the majority of the participants are young adulthood, they are single, and majority are cat owners. They also have pet for more than 12 months. Most of them have only one pet, but the average number of pets owned by the participants is 4. They spend mostly 1 to 6 hours per day with their pet, and majority have monthly expenditure less than 3 million per month. And the most of them come from West Java, Indonesia. Now, I'm going to talk about the personality first. So what is personality? What makes personality more important than looks for some people? Why does every company always conduct personality tests for their prospective employees? Why does a child take a personality test from an early age at school or outside of school? Why does BuzzFeed creating personality tests out there and people are drawn to it? So what makes personality so important? Well, personality refers to individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So the way I think, the way I feel, the way I behave will be totally different from all of you, and so are you. Just like the fingerprint, the nose print in cats and dogs, they are different one another. So personality differentiates one from others, including our emotion, values, attitude, and aptitude. In this research, I'm using the Big Five inventory model of personality because it is considered as one of the most popular model of personality in academia. It claims that human personality consists of 5 factors, or with the mononym OCEAN, the openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. But in this study, I will only focus on 2 types of personality, the extroversion and the neuroticism. Why? because the big five personality traits, particularly extroversion and neuroticism, may serve as mediators of the relationship between pet ownership and well-being. Personality or traits are considered to be 40 to 60% heritable and relatively stable across the lifespan. The heritability is greatest for extroversion and neuroticism, while the other three, openness to experience, conscientiousness, and agreeableness, are not as significant as the two. One of the main objectives in the study is to determine what kind of personality that pet owners have, whether they are more extroverted or they are more neurotics. And the result shows that individuals who owns a cat, dog, fish, chicken, sugar glider, bird, snake, rabbit, hedgehog, and monkey tended to score higher on extroversion than they are on neuroticism. So what are the traits of an extrovert? What makes these pet owners having this tended to score higher on extroversion? So people who are extroverted are open and easy to get to know. They are friendly and approachable. They are also an excellent communicators. Individuals who score high on extroversion tend to be talkative, active, and assertive. Extroversion is compatible with pursuing excitement, novelty, and challenge, the goals of stimulation values. Moreover, the active and assertive aspects of extroversion may facilitate the goal of achievement values and success through demonstrating competence according to social standards. Now, how about the neuroticism? What kind of pet can make us more neurotic? Or maybe what kind of pet that makes the owners tend to score higher on neuroticism? Well, individual who owns a hamster, weasel, and turtle tended to score higher on neuroticism. Individuals who score high on neuroticism are more likely than average to be moody and to experience feelings such as anxiety, worry, fear, anger, and feeling depressed and lonely. People who are neurotic respond worse to stressors and are more likely to interpret ordinary situations as threatening and minor frustrations as hopelessly difficult. They are often self-conscious and shy, and they may have trouble controlling urges and delaying gratification. People with high neuroticism indexes are at risk for development and onset of common mental disorders, such as anxiety disorder, mood disorder, and substance use disorder, symptoms of which had traditionally been called as neurosis. Now we move on to the psychological well-being. So what is psychological well-being? What makes it different with subjective well-being, or is it the same? So the psychological well-being perspective focuses on eudaimonic well-being, while the subjective focuses on the hedonic well-being. So what is the eudaimonic well-being? Eudaimonic well-being, or the psychological well-being, is the fulfillment of human potential and a meaningful life. Psychological well-being involves perceived thriving in the face of existing challenges of life, such as pursuing meaningful goals, growing and developing as a person, and establishing quality ties with others. To achieve high psychological well-being, there are 6 dimensions that must be fulfilled by individuals. And the 6 dimensions include, the first one is self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is defined as characteristic of optimal functioning and maturity. Lifespan theories also emphasize acceptance as oneself and one's past life. The second one is positive relations with others. It's viewed as having strong feelings of empathy and affection for all human beings and capable of deeper friendship and more complete identification with others. The third is personal growth. Personal growth requires not only that one achieve the prior characteristics, but also that one continue to develop one's potential to grow and expand as a person. The next one is environmental mastery. It's individual's ability to choose or create suitable environment to his psychological conditions. The fifth is purpose in life. Purpose in life is defined to include belief that give one the feeling that there is hope and purpose and meaning to life. And the last one is autonomy. Autonomy is seen in qualities such as self-determination, independence, and the regulation of behavior from within. And not only just psychological well-being has its own dimensions, it also has contributing factors to it. And they are age, sex differences, class differences, or socio-economic status, and which is defined in education, income, and occupational standing. And then cultural differences, life event experience, and the last is personality. So Carol Reeve herself, the one that pioneered the psychological well-being, published a journal in 1997 that stated how personality relates to well-being. She found a relationship between dimensions of psychological well-being and personality types, in particularly the Big Five personality or the five-factor model. It turns out that autonomy, purpose in life, self-acceptance, and environmental mastery show a strong correlational pattern with neuroticism and extroversion only, not with the other three types of personality. And 17 years before Reeve published her research, Costa and McCrae, the one who also pioneered the Big Five model of personality, explained that extroversion and neuroticism can significantly affect our psychological well-being. The result of the studies didn't change for 33 years, that extroversion and neuroticism consistently impact psychological well-being. It is shown in the research by Zhang and Zingan in 2013 that stated openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness have an indirect effect to well-being through the two central personality traits, extroversion and neuroticism. Garcia in 2011 says that extroversion positively influences well-being, while neuroticism is negatively related to well-being. So we know that many researchers and psychologists have been studying about the relationship between personality and psychological well-being. And the other objective in the study are, to what extent are extroversion and neuroticism can influence the psychological well-being of pet owners? The answer is 22.7%, where extroversion positively influences the psychological well-being and neuroticism negatively influences the psychological well-being. The study also shows that the more extroverted a person is, the higher the psychological well-being. And the more neurotic a person is, the lower the psychological well-being. Now, I will talk about the analysis of psychological well-being based on the length of having a pet, the number of pets owned, and the length of time playing with pets in a day. In the study, pet owners who have owned pets for more than 1 year tend to have better psychological well-being and will continue to improve over time with pets they owned. And the greater the number of pets owned and the longer the duration of playing with pet in a day also shows that pet owners will having a better psychological well-being. So playing with your pets in a day, it's not a time-consuming activity at all because it is actually good for your psychological well-being. And it affects us 1.27% to our psychological well-being. The second one is psychological well-being analysis based on gender and marital status. Carol Reeve in 1996 says that female or women tend to have a better psychological well-being than men in terms of positive relations with others and also personal growth. But this study shows that male pet owners have better psychological well-being than female pet owners. And also, married pet owners have better psychological well-being than pet owners who are singles and widows. And it affects our psychological well-being by 1.9%. And the last is a psychological well-being analysis based on age, occupation, and expenditure. Before explaining it, the characteristics of the participants were, one of the characteristics were, there are two types of groups. The one group is the person or the pet owners who have monthly expenditure less than 3 million, and the other group is the pet owners who have monthly expenditure more than 3 million. And it shows that the higher the expenditure, the better the psychological well-being. So pet owners who have monthly expenditure more than 3 million per month, in conclusion, is having a better psychological well-being than the other group. And for age, the older a person is, the better the psychological well-being. How about occupational standing? Housewives pet owner is having a better psychological well-being than students, employees, and retirees. So before it ends, I'd like to say that considering that pets are not only capable of being our friends and family, but also capable of providing psychological benefits to us, I think we should all start to appreciating and treating our own pets and animals better and right. Someday, perhaps, we'll better understand the animal world. In the meantime, we do well to simply appreciate that animal world is brainy and it's full of heart too. That's all from me. I'm Nadya. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mbak Nadya. Very interesting presentation. We'll be waiting for a question from the audience. Maybe I'm just gonna ask a bit of question. From the scales you use, did you conduct the reliability test?
Yes, I did conduct a reliability test on both measured the risk scales of psychological well-being and the Big Five inventory.
All right, how was the result?
For the psychological well-being, the reliability stands on 1.706. And for the Big Five inventory, both extroversion and neuroticism, the number is on 1.607.
Okay. All right. You've managed to collect a very high number of samples there.
Yeah.
And it's all in the West Java, or did I miss something?
Yes, the majority of participants comes from West Java, Indonesia.
All right. Do you have any advices or insights you can give to the pet owners aside from your closing statement before?
I think for all the pet owners or prospective pet owners, adopt, don't shop. Do not buy any kind of animals from pet shop or breeder. You can save one from an animal shelter. And for the one who has already have pet at home, trying to look at them as a family, not as a pleasure toy or something, because they have heart too. They consider themselves as their only family, so it's better for you to take a good care of them in the best way possible.
All right, there's a question there. Thank you for your answer. If a person would choose turtle rather than cat, is not having a good PWB and their personality tend to be neuroticism. So
I think for this question, personality itself describes individual propensity towards stable pattern of behavior and thought. And every one of us has both extroverted and neurotic side, with one being more dominant than the other. So I think it depends on that person itself, not solely from the animals that they owned, but maybe you have to consider more the factors that can contribute to the psychological well-being, as I mentioned before, such as age, cultural differences, class differences, and life event and experience.
nice, thank you. Did you discuss about the level of education and its correlation with the pet ownership and well-being?
In the study,
Did you have initial insight for that?
actually, most of the participants in the study are students, college students, aged 19 to 22. And when I did a research, like just to find out whether it has a contribution to psychological well-being, it turns out that the longer time you spend at school, or the longer time you spend at school, is the worse your psychological well-being. That's all about education, nothing more.
Okay. So we just gonna move on to question from Risky Edu. Is there more explanation? See, he wants more elaboration. Why higher expenditure more will result in more PWB?
Okay, so why the expenditure get more? Because I think the Carol Reeve herself even stated that why expenditure can contribute to more psychological well-being, because lower positions in the social order not only increase the likelihood of negative health outcomes, they also decrease the likelihood of positive well-being. So when you have a bigger expenditure on something, it means that you can access more to the health. You can access more to health for it's good for your health, and also it is increase the likelihood of your positive well-being, because you don't have to wait, or you don't have to dial down your sickness. Maybe that's all.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Mas Gunawan Tanuwijaya. Any study related to dog owner? And what's the difference?
Actually, for this study, I'm researching all of them, not only just. I didn't do pilot research on cats or dogs, but I did them all. So for the study, I don't have any capacity to answer that, because I didn't do any single research on dogs itself.
But on your literature review, do you find any study about dog owner and probably comparison with other pets?
Oh yes, dog owners tended to be more having a good physical health, and they also tended to be more extroverted. And dog owners tended to have a more conscientiousness than any other kind of pet, including cats. And but dog owners tended to be more aggressive, because sometimes they just inherited some traits from your pets also.
Interesting. The personality dimension that you use, which author use it again? Which theory use it again?
What?
You have 5 personality that you use, right? And you only use 2. Who wrote that again?
The Bow and Schreier in 2016, but it also supported by other research, like the Carol Reeve herself, the one that pioneered the psychological well-being, and also Costa and McRae, the one that pioneered the Big 5 personality model of personality.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're still waiting from the audience. Probably you can explain more about the trend in Indonesia now. I think your findings suggest that there are more cat owners there in Indonesia. Is there any insight on how on what triggered that?
From my perspectives, why Indonesians tend to own a cat instead of a dog, because maybe it's cultural, because majority of Indonesians are Muslim, and for what I know, in Islam, it is prohibited to own a dog, because I don't know, but it is prohibited to own a dog. So I think it comes to the point where people who wants to own a pet, they try to find any other alternatives, but not dog, maybe cats. And because cats' expenses is not as huge as a dog, like from the food, from the maintenance, cat owners spend less than dog owners.
Thank you. And you've done the research, you've done well, and then I'm just wondering, what are your future research? What are your plan with the future with pet owners and well-being? Are you planning to include more dimensions like religiosity, for example, or environmental behavior? What do you have in your mind?
for the next research, I mean, maybe sometime in the near future, I want to make a single research, maybe just focus on one type of pet, or making a comparison between only two pets, not having like a 15 kind of pets in one research, because I want to emphasize more on how it is influences the personality. But maybe I also want to expand the personality types, not only extroversion and neuroticism, but maybe the conscientiousness, openness, and also agreeableness, or maybe trying to research it with another personality type, like thinking, sensing, feeling, or type A, type B. So it is more diverse in types of personality.
All right. Do you have any insights on the children development for their skills? I think that's going to be interesting. Have you looked into that?
Yes, I think I also want to differentiate how it influenced to the children and to older adults, and also to the one that above 70 years. I want to really make a comparison between all stages of age.
All right.
With pet ownership. Because pet ownership in Indonesia the literature is difficult to find, and it's not as huge, or it's not a research that can be considered as worth to find. So I think I want to add more literature to the Indonesian pet ownership research in the near future.
Okay, thank you. From Beli Gede, far away from Bali here. I hope you are well. Some people discourage to have a pet. What do you have in mind for that?
I think it's okay, because maybe the reason why they discourage to have a pet, because they know their capacity, and they know that they're not in a stable state of owning a pet. So I think knowing your capacity, knowing your potential of having a pet, because raising an animal with you is not just like a 1 or 2 year pleasure or companionship. It is a lifetime companionship for both of you, and for both you and the animal. So for people who are discouraging to having a pet, I think it's okay. It's just okay, because maybe the reason behind it is that they know their capacity. Like maybe they're not in a good state of owning a pet right now.
Okay. From Mas Lutfi, the previous presenter, in Australia, not all household is permitted to have a pet based on the regulation. And what do you think about this regulation?
I think because it is a regulation, so there must be a reasons behind it. Like I don't really understand about the regulation in Australia, but maybe it is created for some good reasons. Not only to the human, to us, but also to pet itself. So it's just
Thank
fine.
you. Probably in the future, you might be interested to do a cross country study in comparison with Australia and Indonesia, because most people here in Australia, they have dogs, a lot of dogs, a lot of parks there, and they make a space exclusively for dogs. They can release their dogs there, and then the dogs can run around. It's a big space there. So you might want to consider that. And yeah,
I'd love to do any further research about pet ownership with a broader topics on it.
Yeah, if you can include more dimensions, they'll be very interesting. Especially religiosity. Indonesia is biggest Muslim population, and then if you can include Alport religiosity scales, and then see its impact to well-being, not just well-being, probably I don't know what's the trend nowadays, environmental behavior, or probably ownership of pet, and then ethical behavior, something like that. It's kind of new in the literature, right? I don't know if you have found anything about ethical behavior. A lot of journals now, business ethics, the A-star one, they're really looking forward for new stuff there. So just something you want to think about. And you mentioned you work at the psychiatric hospital there.
Yes,
This
I was.
might be a long shot there, but if you ever, what about their mental well-being and the pet ownership? Are there any correlations? Are there any insights there?
I think pet ownership or pet or animal in general can be used in psychiatric hospital in terms of as an animal assisted therapy or just like a companion animal for the patients there. It is the term the animal assisted therapy is widely used in the Western countries such as in the US and then in Germany and in Japan, but it is not as popular in Indonesia. And animal therapy is greatly contributing to a greatly amount of well-being in patients, and I think it's good for patients to have a companion animal with during their time in psychiatric hospital, because their mental state in the psychiatric hospital, I have to say that it's not good for them to just left alone.
Very interesting. Thank you. More comments there. Thanks for the answer. Congrats, Nadya. Very interesting research. Yeah, that's your lecture right there. Yeah, yes. Herdian, yeah. Very fast. Mbak Puji, just applause, and then I can initiate further collaboration about this research team. All right, that's interesting. Probably in the future you can think about it, add more dimensions because that's what they're looking for: correlations and then convergence between interdisciplinary approach. And time is nearly our closing time. So just gonna have a bit of words from two of our speakers. First, a big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you very much for your time, for your insights, for your passion in this area, and then for providing us with this useful information. Probably I'll start with the first speaker, Mas Lutfi. You have any closing statement?
All right, thank you very much, Mas Igun. So yeah, maybe it's a short closing statement. As we know that I'm working in wildland fires, and currently the wildland fires is one of the biggest natural disaster in the world, not only in Australia. As we know that that currently wildland fires is still happening in California, in the US, and in Indonesia as well. Wildland fire is currently it's sometimes happening in forms of the pit fires, and it's happened almost every year. So that yeah, we still need to work together to make a better life and create a safer built environment and natural environment. So yeah, that's my closing statement. Thank you very much for Isaac to preparing and help this kind of mini conference, and I look forward for the next event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Lutfi. We're moving to Mbak Nadya. Mbak, silakan, please.
My closing statement will be the same: adopt, don't shop. You can adopt from an animal shelter or saving the strays from the street. It will be much helpful not only to that animal but also to the society. And if you can own a pet, you can contribute by trap, neuter, and return. You can sterilize the cat so it won't affect the society in a bad way. That's all from me, and thank you for the opportunities.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Mbak Nadya, Mbak Wanda. Sorry, Mbak Nadya, Mas Lutfi. I mean, I guess this we reach a conclusion to our event, mini conference of Isaac. We would like to thank Isaac for a very well done job to deliver this conference. To Isaac first, to in particularly to Mbak Prima, who has done very well, who has contributed significantly to this event, and to Interest Ed, to Perpustakaan, Kementerian Pendidikan, to Mas Roland and team, to Chandra Garpu, to Universitas Indonesia, and of course, yeah, we look forward to hear from the audience here, from the participant. We are very open for collaborations. We are very open for more events coming up, and we are looking forward to work together with the audience. And thank you very much. This is Gunaro. So we look forward to our next event. Thank you very much.